Welcome to Spiritual Studies Session 21. This is on Hermeticism. So the format of this talk in particular is going to be first a historical analysis, telling you everything that I can about Hermeticism based on its influence in history and in religion, its span throughout time. Then I'm going to, in the second portion, actually dive into the thought of Hermeticism. So this is an introductory sort of talk. This is by no means a deep dive. I'm going to give you the whole span of the field, and then if anyone wants to do their own research, this will give you more than enough to investigate. So when I say the name Hermes Trismegistus, that is where the name Hermeticism comes from, Hermes Trismegistus. This is Greek, meaning the thrice greatest Hermes. In Latin, this would be translated as Mercurius ter Maximus, the Maximus of Mercury. We'll divulge that some more later. Suffice it to say that Hermes is the Greek god of wisdom, equivalent to the Roman god Mercury, and equivalent to the Egyptian god Thoth, or Thoth. I've heard it said many different ways. You can say that Hermetism is an appropriation of Egyptian wisdom. You could also say that it's a more ancient wisdom than that. This figure, Hermes Trismegistus, is debated to be an individual long ago. It's also debated to be a certain divine essence of wisdom, like the Logos, that works its way through people. One explanation is that many different authors wrote under the pseudonym Hermes Trismegistus, because in ancient tradition, you would not want to take credit for the wisdom that you received. You would want to give the credit to the spirit of wisdom. And thus, you have all these various writers who are divinely inspired, giving their name as Hermes Trismegistus. So that's just one way, and we'll divulge that some more later. So when it comes to actual Hermeticism, you have a lot of associations with magic, Babylonian astrology, alchemy. This is all fair. This is what stems from Hermeticism. But you also have the philosophical end of Hermeticism, which is what most notably inspires different religions that we're going to touch on. So some people would say that back in this time, there was a sort of religious cult practice that handed down the wisdom of Hermes Trismegistus, that this was the initial secret school knowledge. And to those that study such esoteric topics, secret schools, secret wisdom traditions go as far back as civilization could ever say. One other thing that I have to address about Hermeticism is when you trace this back historically, you see how close it is to Gnosticism. Some scholars will say that these popped up at the same time. I would debate that. One distinction I want to make between Gnosticism and Hermeticism. Gnosticism believes that the material world is fundamentally a trap, and it is something to escape, to transcend in whole. Hermeticism believes that through the power of will and mastery, one can naturally transcend the material existence. This is a lot more mundane than it might sound at first. It might sound super mystical, but Hermeticism is more about working with what you got, and Gnosticism is more lean towards escaping everything. So one of the big books to read for nerding out in Hermeticism is the Asclepius. Asclepius is the god of healing. This book would give an inspiration for many topics, including how to work with angels, how to work with demons, how to use certain herbs, gems, smells, how to imbibe certain statues, how to realize prophecy, clairvoyance. And so you can see these early texts are going to be the inspiration for the many grimoires that came out in the Middle Ages of people wanting to find stones, of people wanting to call certain angels or demons for knowledge. You see this a lot in classical paganism, in conjurations. In this way, you can say that the Hermetica, the Asclepius, papyri documents like this are the inception of these things, or the roots of these things. So on the debate of how early Hermeticism is, many scholars try to curve it out at the Greeks, but you'll find at the Temple of Esna, which is in Egypt, it's actually about 50 kilometers south of what is called Luxor, or what the ancients called Thebes. And in there, it ascribes to Thoth. They calls him Thoth the Great, the Great, the Great. This is a Trismegistus right here. The Great, the Great, the Great. This is anciently referred to as a trihagion, which we see plenty in the Bible. When the Sephirim are chanting the name of God, they say it 3 times. This is an ancient thing. You can also note, too, that Hermeticism is very much married to Pythagoreanism. And in that, you have this obsession with triangles, with 3, the Trinity. So this is a trope that you could say is a part of Hermeticism, involved in Hermeticism, or is rooted in Hermeticism, this fascination with the Trinity. And in Hermeticism, it is the body, the soul, and the spirit, or a reference to the 3 different planes of existence. I'm not going to get into that right now. So there's many ways, as I've covered, that people try to talk about the history of Hermeticism. Was Hermes an actual person? So when practitioners or people who are more privy to the tradition, they say that Hermes was incarnated, was embodied long before Moses, and was a contemporary of Abraham, and gave some of the mystic wisdom to Abraham in Egypt. So essentially, that these 3 different cultures, Egypt, Rome, and Greece, are all naming the same person differently. So again, I'm just adding to the ambiguity of what this tradition actually is. There is a fascination, especially early on in different periods of Hermeticism, with astrology. And of course, this would be demonized later by the church. Go figure. But the idea here is that in understanding astrology, in understanding the stars, and reading the stars, in really intuiting what's going on with them and their influence on the world, the philosophy says that what happens out there is a mirror for what's happening in here, or the external world is saying something about the internal being. So there's a poetry to be discerned from the stars, that everything is interdependent. And this is the very bedrock of all the occult sciences. All occultism, uses of magic, which is a whole nother topic, depend on this interdependency of all things, that all things are connected, that the internal matches the external, and thus the subsequent change of perspective would influence the external world. This is the root of magic. So as I've already said, we can see that this philosophy, and I call it a philosophy, not a religion, of Hermetism, is tied to astrology, is tied to alchemy, is tied to the different Western traditions, is tied to Pythagoreanism, is tied to the Stoics, is tied to Plato, and is tied to all of the Eastern religions. Well, I shouldn't say all, many of the Eastern religions. So to give you a little taste, I don't want to quote this old papyri and stuff like that, but I want to give you some of the verbiage so you can kind of get a hint of what it would be like to read through Hermetic works. And I'm just cutting this all apart, so just breathe in the essence of this, the aura of this. The breath of God and conscious fire blended with unconscious matter. God then makes the sacred animals of water and of earth and gives some matter to the souls to make men in their own nature. But the whole of existence is entirely before and outside the present world of men. Proud of their works, the souls armed themselves and were forever moving. God therefore resolved to embody them as men. The gods are called to promise their gifts to the new world of men. The sun will shine, the moon will give fear, silence, sleep, and memory. Kronos will give justice and necessity. Zeus will give fortune, hope, and peace. Ares gives struggle, wrath, and strife. Aphrodite gives despair, desire, bliss. And Hermes gives prudence, wisdom, persuasiveness, and truth, and will work with invention. So in this, you can very plainly see that the reference to the gods are actually references to the planets. Aphrodite is Venus, Zeus is Jupiter, so on. Kronos is Saturn. And in all these ways, it's all hinting towards what they call the all. The all is what God is to them. There is nothing outside of what God is. So when they would use the word God or subsequent translation, it's always about the all. And we'll dig into that some more later. But it doesn't exclude pagan thought. It includes pagan thought. So it is monotheistic, including the pantheistic. But again, I don't want to use too many religious terms to define Hermetic thinking in general. Now, to kind of get out of the theology end of things, this Hermetic tradition would be brought up in the Renaissance tremendously, and subsequently would create many cult movements throughout time, one being the Rosicrucians, which is a pretty hot button topic when it comes to occultic history. So I'll briefly touch on the Rosicrucians and their likeness and how they took inspiration. So the Rosicrucians was a sort of, well, definitely a cultural movement, a spiritual movement that announced in the 17th century that they had the secret wisdom. They had the esoteric teaching. They held the mysterious doctrine. And this would attract whomever, right? I mean, this is a whole chapter of history to dive into. But what this actual teaching was a blend with a hard foundation of Hermeticism, Kabbalah, alchemy, and Christian mysticism. I want to take a little time right now and say that everything that I'm covering here in Hermeticism ties very closely to Kabbalism, ties very closely to the Tetragrammaton, the Tree of Life, the Jewish mysticism. These two things are very inclusive of one another. That's a whole nother topic of itself. But when I'm talking about these cults, they don't just take from Hermeticism, Kabbalah is always in the mix too. So take note of that. So the idea here in the Rosicrucian initiations and so forth, there was always this theme of secrecy, right? That you have to be willing to go through levels of understanding in order to acquire the knowledge that they have. We still see this embodied in Freemasonry. We see this embodied throughout history. Again, secret society. So the idea here is that in Hermeticism, there is a direct quote from the Kabbalion that says, "The lips of wisdom are shut, except to the ears of understanding." That powerful knowledge should not be given to those who would abuse it. And oftentimes, giving very powerful knowledge to the wrong people will lead them to misunderstand it completely and move the point in the opposite direction that the wisdom is intended. So this is also a classic trope of why it took the Jewish masters of Kabbalah so long to let out some of the knowledge about Kabbalism in the Tree of Life. There was a big, tremendous debate on if they should let this information out because they had held it for so long. And this is the ethical dilemma of secret societies. Secret societies nowadays, as a kind of side note, the Freemasons are rather dwindling because they're finding that the new generations are unwilling to keep secrets. They are unwilling to go through these binding type of schemas. Is that for better or for worse? That's a whole nother topic. So the Rosicrucians ultimately would say that they would keep their secrets mostly secret. They wouldn't show it off. They wouldn't let it out. They wouldn't even let it out to the many in their order until the intellectual climate of the world would improve. So this is kind of eerie because now it's to say that the secret knowledge, the truth of everything is out there, but it's just waiting for the ears that can actually hear it. It's waiting for people who can actually understand it. It's waiting for people to be humble enough, to be open enough to actually receive it in large. And until then, secrecy, the few. So another inspiration from Hermeticism that I need to talk about is the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Yet again, a secret society, this one popping up in the early 1900s. This one focused more on paranormal activities, means, investigations, metaphysics, and occultism. It's very tied to a few movements. It came after spiritualism, so there's that effect, there's that influence. It's coming alongside theosophy, which is a whole nother topic, which focuses on like this and many other things, and would inspire Thelema because of Alexander Crowley's separation from the order, and it would also inspire Wicca, the bringing back of neo-paganism. So yet again, we're seeing this renaissance of all these ideas being pushed out of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And what inspired the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, right? Hermes Trismegistus, or, Gnostics, the Rosicrucians, right? All of this is fanning out from the same seed is what I'm trying to say. So no accident here, too, that the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was founded by Freemasons, right? What would Freemasons be talking about? And you can see yet again in these Masonic lodges and these lodges of the Golden Dawn discussions of the Hermetic Kabbalah. Hermetic Kabbalah. Okay, these two things going together. And study of the classical elements in how you can use them in ceremonies, in magic. Focus on such things as astrology, tarot, divination, right? All these things rooted in magic or the secret sciences. Ooh. So as you would go up in the order of the Hermetic dawn, golden dawn, as you would work your way up the class system that they formed, you were eventually taught magic. This would include scrying, astral travel, and alchemy. Again, alchemy coming from the root of Hermeticism. So all in all, you see that this movement would eventually devolve. There's actually a far-right party in Greece that still holds this name. You would see it become lost in its way, and that's why it's become generally derelict or disbanded. As with many ancient symbols, eventually they lose their meaning, and people bring all sorts of misinterpretations to fill the void of the symbol that's no longer understood. And this is a great example of what happened to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. So in this, where does this leave us, right? I've mentioned how Hermeticism has fanned out into the contemporary times, what it's inspired. Now, before getting into the main philosophy that I've been teasing at this whole time, I have to talk about one of the most notable, ubiquitous sources when it comes to Hermeticism, and that is the Emerald Tablet. You could call this the Emerald Tablet of Thoth. You can call this the Emerald Tablet of Hermes. You also see this if you ever watch the show Dark. This Emerald Tablet is tattooed on the back of one of the main antagonists, an occultist. I think they called him Noah. This particular writing, tablet translation, is a source of inspiration in the Arabic world, in the Greek world, in the Egyptian world. You see that although it might appear to be saying how to acquire the Philosopher's Stone, the quintessence, the ether, there's arguments that it's actually subliminally providing the secret code of material existence itself. This is really gawky stuff. And you can listen to the Emerald Tablet. You can actually find audio recordings of the whole thing on YouTube. You can look it up. These things are available for anybody to look at, so be a judge to all that I'm saying. So people can't say where this Emerald Tablet originated. They can't say why it was made. They can't even interpret what exactly it means. So you're dealing with a level of esotericism, much like in alchemy, where there's a language behind the language. This is true in scripture too, where you think what you're reading at face value is what it is. But actually, you're dealing with people who are encoding things. They are not necessarily attempting to mislead. They're actually trying to filter out those who wouldn't understand it and those who do understand it. That's the kind of mystery and magic of the written word. So the claims of people and scripture when it comes to explaining Thoth, Hermes Trismegistus, the giver of this knowledge, can be quite out there. So believe it or not, the claim, one of the claims, is that 38,000 years ago, Thoth, or who we call Thoth, was an Atlantean priest king. And in the spiritual studies course, this is the first time that I had to bring up Atlantis. If you, for reference, you know, I had to bring this up a lot back in the snake occultism talk. This is, I can't avoid having to bring this up. So long in the early days of Atlantis, Thoth was born in a city that's called Keor. And as he's there learning these secrets, he acquires the key to perpetual life, or what later scholars would coin the fountain of youth. And in this way, managed to become immortal. And when Atlantis sank, him and his followers fled to Egypt in the land of Kem. That's what it was called, Kem. And this would constitute what would make Egypt Egypt, and that Thoth would help to build the pyramids, that Thoth would inscribe the Emerald Tablet, and would be the initial inspiration that would be the intellectual genius of the height of the Egyptians. So you could say, again, that this was a person, in this interpretation, Hermes, Thoth, was a person who might still even be living. Yeah, I know, right? Or here's the other one, that the incarnation of Thoth, Hermes, has taken on several bodies throughout time, and that has taken on the body from Atlantis, the body in Egypt, and the body in Greece, of which would be an inspiration for the Mercury of Rome. Or another way around, that there is this divine wisdom soul that comes at a specific time to give the treasure trail of knowledge to humanity as it's bumbling about. So notice this is a very unique religion, if you want to understand it that way. The technical work and the philosophical work of Hermeticism gives you more than enough to dive into when it comes to comparative religions, and when it comes to things that can actually apply to you, that you can make work in your everyday life. And it's not a completely, like, you can't just say it's for the secret societies and for the occultists. You have Isaac Newton, who translated the work of Hermes when he was studying all the alchemical work before he became famous. This is unnegotiable. If you were back in the day and you were studying the stars, you had to dig up Hermes. If you were Greek, you had to know about Hermes. If you were in the Middle Ages and you were trying to put together a grimoire, trying to understand the magical rites, you had to talk Hermes. It, again, is this root. So I'm done giving this span. That's good because I'm almost at 30 minutes. That's the historical basis. That's a kind of dipping our toe in the water of the ambiguity. When you're looking at scholars to try to explain the history, the understanding of Hermetic thinking, of what it's been in history, go with it at a grain of salt. It is intentionally ambiguous. It is, and here's the thing that I want to say. The point isn't in understanding its exact context. The point is in understanding what the content is. So instead of being strung along and chasing your own tail when it comes to how do I contextualize this, instead just go into the philosophy, and from there look into the technica, the technical, if you want to dive into the magical end of things. But right now I'm going to give you the philosophy, and this takes the form of the 7 Hermetic principles, and we're going to talk through this slowly. I'm going to take my time, and this is going to be my little crash course for you, so I can imbibe you with the kind of mentality that we're talking about without you needing to dive and dive and dive through all these different books to acquire it. And this way, if you do choose to further research, you have a great start in immediately contextualizing where this stuff is coming from. Okay. I'm excited about this. It's not too often that I get to do philosophy. Okay. So principle number 1 is the principle of mentalism. This is, thank you. This is the thought that everything is mental. Everything is mental. Allow yourself the idea that the objective world is not a thing, that everything is about how it's thought about. So let's break this down a little bit. Everything from a physicist's perspective, if you look down the microscope, is energy. It's not solid. Nothing is really solid. There's a lot of empty space, even in a rock. That everything is densified energy, or what the ancients would call spirit. So in this way, I can say that everything, that spirit is refined matter, that all is energy, that the substance of reality is particles, energy, spirit. And in quantum mechanics, in the double slit experiment, we observed that the reality depends on how we approach it, right? Is it a wave? Is it a particle? And in this way, everything around you is reacting to your perception. So when I say it, I mean what is allegedly outside of you is undefinable, but can be considered a universal living mind. So in the universal living mind, and my mind, we could call this spirit, we could call this soul, we could call this consciousness. Everything is of mind. All of this is a matter of thinking. All of this is a matter of interpretation. So this is the principle of mentalism, and this is the first principle. And this is the root of magic. Again, as I was speaking before, first deal with your internal, then that will bleed out into the external. The master works with himself, not with the world. So that is a principle of mind over matter, essentially. And I understand there's a lot of ways that you can try to debate this, but just go along with this. Let's get through all the principles and then have your criticisms, okay? Number 2, the principle of correspondence. So this is where we get the phrase, as above, so below, as within, so without, as the universe, so the soul. This is to say that if you're going to, I'm going to have to give a few examples here. On one level of existence, it may appear as if it's chaos. But if you go up and you look, then it appears to be music. It appears to be completely orderly. And then the same with above that and the same with above that. For instance, if we had a real tight shot of all the particles hitting each other, that's chaos. But then if we go out, then we see that the electrons are doing a dance around the proton, right? As above, so below. On the other scale, the microcosm and the macrocosm mirror each other, all right? So the former example, the electrons and the proton. The electrons rotating around the proton. Okay, now let's look at space, right? The planets revolving around the sun. The solar systems revolving around a galaxy. On and on and on and on. This is the principle of correspondence. As within, so without. As in the universe, so in the soul. As above, so below. So this is the idea that everything is connected, intertwined. No matter what plane of existence you're on, you're dealing with the same laws. You're dealing with the same crafting, the same model, the same simulation. So the macrocosm and the microcosm imply each other. There's a vice versa-ness. And in society, we might think in our society that this is chaotic disorder, right? But then if you were to ask the stars about it in their influence in the luminaries, this is all just chiming out. This is all just exactly as it should be. So on one level, chaos, and on another, order, right? So the idea here in the level of correspondence is that you can choose your perspectives, right? We can choose our perspective. So now we're applying the law of mentalism. So am I wanting to participate on the level that implies chaos? Or am I willing to expand my perspective and see that there's an order to this, right? Or do I just want to sink into this chaos, you know, and then become a part of it and so convinced, right? This is to say that there are many levels that we can participate on. So in this too, what happens in the macro affects the micro, and what happens in the micro affects the macro, right? So this is the beginning of the feeling that you can have in yourself of empowerment. So normally in our standard contemporary postmodernist mentality, we are a fluke, a victim of everything around us, right? You've got no power. You're a sorry little thing. Ha ha. And in this, it's saying that you have the power to supersede this. In yourself, you can change your perspective. You can realize the other way. So in this, I have to I'm sorry, I'm spending a lot of time on this one, but I feel like I really need to hammer this point. The outer world in this way is a reflection of your inner world. As within, so without. So you have something you need to work out in yourself. Then you attract people that make you face this problem. And if you are always surrounded by the same people, then that might be just to say, like, and I mean always, for years and years and years, and nothing changes. That might just be to say that that is what you're attracting. You're not changing it. And I'm not trying to paint that in a bad light, but I'm saying that the people that come into your life, the circumstances that come into your life, the mentalities that come into your life, this is an outer reflection of your inner world. I'm not saying that everybody outside of me isn't real. I realize how complex this is. But I'm saying what you think will bring things to you. This is the law of manifestation. In the correspondence of the universe and how everything is stitched together on all planes of existence, this is to say that you attract it. So think about that. So what do you want to see is a big question of that. What do you want to be? What do you want to be? Okay, next up, the principle of vibration. And this is a direct quote from the Kabbalion, that nothing rests, everything moves, and everything vibrates. So, again, I'll start with the subject of physics. The stone appears still, but on the micro level is actually quite active. It's vibrating, it's moving. And it wouldn't take the form of that particular substance if it wasn't moving. Every substance has a particular vibration, okay? So in this, since everything is in a constant state of movement, nothing is still. Nothing is still. Everything is involved in the flux. Okay, we're going pre-Socratic with this. Everything is flux. And this is as much including your mind as it is your body. So the stone only feels hard because I am soft in relation to it. Whereas softer things like silk would perceive me as hard, like a stone. And this is all a matter of vibration. So in the materiality of all things, this is the case. But also in the internal world, this is the case. Everything is vibration. So check your vibes. If you feel down and out, that's a vibration. This is the principle of vibration. If you feel elated, if you feel calm, this is vibration. My voice speaking to you right now, sounds in the air. This is vibration. The waves of light moving through the vacuum of space, the ether, the akasha, that is a wave. It's vibrating. The light meeting your eyes, the sounds meeting your ears, all these things. What you put out, vibration. So with this, it's a call towards you using your will to deliberately change your vibes. A mental transmutation. Here's an example. Let's dial it back. Think about when you were 15. What problems did you have? It might be like about something you're wearing or what Susie said at lunch. Trivial things, I'd imagine. If you really thought about all those problems, you'd realize now that those don't apply to you anymore. These problems that you thought were inescapable, were like eternal, right? And all of its drama, no longer, where are they? They don't exist, not in you. And that's because you have changed your mind. You have transmuted that level, that channel. And so with this, the problems that you have right now, in the same way, you think, this is inescapable. This is so serious. I'm so convinced, right? This is so much drama. And in the same way, you can transmute that vibe. Your focus is what grows things. And this is the other part of it. Your focus is what gives you growth. So if you took your will and you focused on what you want to supersede, what things aren't actually problems, and you're focusing on instead what you want to become, right? You're using that focus. This is what makes you grow. This is what makes you change things. Your consciousness makes you change things. So if you're conscious that this isn't the situation that I want to be in, and you focus on a different way of being, on what you want to aim towards, you will rise to that. Changing the dials of your radio, changing your vibration. So as an example, to make it mundane, because I don't want to come across as too hooey here. The other day I was feeling real groggy, indiscriminately. And I took a moment to realize that I felt this way. And then what I tried to do is I tried to imagine the slightest feeling of clarity. Just imagine the slightest feeling of a clear head. And I focused on that. And I focused on that. And I focused and I focused. And slowly it unfolded a measure of clarity to me. And I'm by no means a master. Don't get me wrong. I'm just trying to explain all this. But there is a capacity within you to take control of certain erraticness. And this will ultimately leave you in a more peaceful place. So the law of vibration, the principle of vibration, is very notable, and there's a lot more to realize from it than I'm saying. So let's move on. Next is the principle of polarity. So the quote here is that everything is dual. Everything has its ends. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. That's a direct quote from the Kabbalion. So to give this some more explanation, hot becomes cold. Cold becomes hot. Again, you might think that the room is hot in relation to your temperature, but in relation to another temperature, it might be cold. Or vice versa, right? Again, it's the same example. The stone is hard in relation to yourself, okay? This room is hot in relation to yourself. But what is this hot coldness? Are they at battle with each other? No, that's silly, right? It's a difference in degree, and that's it. The essence of it would seem to be heat. Heat seems to be the essence, and cold seems to be the lack of heat, but it's just a lesser degree of heat. Okay. So these opposites are different parts of a chord, different parts of a spectra, right? The foolishness of thinking that good and bad are at ends with each other. They're fighting, right? And one's got to win, right? Is as foolish as thinking that purple is better than yellow. It's different degrees on a spectrum. And I'm not saying that I'm making this so relativistic that we can't collectively improve things over time. You just slide down the spectrum. You move every bit of it down. And then, but there will always be this concept, because even in utopia, small inconveniences would be classified as evil. There's always going to be this spectrum. There's always going to be what we want to move more towards because of a certain fascination, feeling, vibe, and then what we want to move away from. This is true on all levels of existence. So in this way, you can change opposites. So again, as I was saying, like in the external world, say we have like you heat up your stove till it's really hot. And then what you can do is you can turn it down. And you can do things in your environment that would make it cold. If you wanted to obsess over a very small amount of space, then you could just throw ice on it. And you can make that same space the opposite of the spectrum. And this applies in the external environment like it implies in your internal environment. So again, this sentiment of the will, you can change fear into cowardice. You can't change something that's not its opposite. So again, we can't do just straight wizardry, but you can, by these Hermetic principles, change things into their opposite, okay? So here's a good example. Many people have had a codependent relationship, really dicey. And they love, oh my gosh, they love each other so much. And then in time, they just hate each other. Or the feeling of hatred starts to bubble up. And that's because you're sliding wildly on this roller coaster of scale, on this line, on this spectrum. And so the idea here is that you can joscillate, or you can choose to understand both ends of it and hang out there in the middle, to recognize what it means to hang out there in the middle, and to also recognize that if you're going to go up, You got to get down. So this principle of polarity means that you can change where it's shifting on that particular opposite. So if I feel hatred, say there's something in my external world, this is very common nowadays, that there's a group of people that I just hate, right? I hate them. They're everything that's wrong with the world. Now, focus on that feeling. And that hatred, somewhere in that, down the line, it's because you care. You care. You love something. You want to see something flourish. And that's what's bringing you to hate. So recognize, instead of just drowning in that hatred, recognize where it is that you care, because it's there. This is transmuting. You focus on where that is. Where is that rooted in? So in this, we again have a certain level of control. We see entirely too much greed in the world, right? So what is the opposite of greed? That's compassion, altruism. So instead of feeling greedy and in us and only providing more of that in the world, we need to start being more compassionate. That's the thing that will send the greed away, right? We need to hone that in. Focus on that. Be that. Because more greed is not going to help, right? So you can change the level. You can change the level of the opposites that you're working with. And the idea is to keep working up Jacob's ladder, to keep pushing up the threshold, to keep raising the vibration, so that these mundane problems, these trivial problems, these problems that we shouldn't be having aren't problems anymore because we have superseded them. This is polarity. So when it comes to different paradoxes of nature, this is a fun task, look into paradoxes and think about this principle of polarity. Think about what are the opposites and how do the opposites imply each other? How do they make each other? This is classic yin-yang stuff. They're both needed. But how can you work with one and the other? What do they say about each other? So it's not about good and bad. It's about what unites good and bad. That's where the real thing is. That's why it says all truths are half-truths. Okay. Next is the principle of rhythm. And this is somewhat similar. This is number 5. And this is to say that everything flows in and out. This is the flux again. Everything has its tides. All things rise and all things fall. So this is like the seashore. The shore has high tide and it has low tide. Here where I live, we have the rivers, the Columbia, the Wenatchee, the Icicle Creek. And there will be a time where it floods and there will be a time where it recedes. As with the moon, there'll be a time where it gets full. There'll be a time that it recedes and it seems to disappear altogether. This is a part of a rhythm. This is a dance. When you dance, you move one way and you move another way. It's always a different variation on that, to left, to the right, front, back, right? It's always this balancing act of moving all these different ways. So in the principle of rhythm, it's to say that you're always going to swing on this pendulum. This bleeds into that opposite discussion that we were having before. The pendulum is saying that you always are going to oscillate in some way. If you feel a lot of love, then that'll bleed back into hate, right? If you feel a lot of compassion, that might bring you back towards greed. You're always going to be kind of swinging on this pedestal of rhythm. And everything's doing its dance, that's part of the vibration, the planets, the galaxy. It's all doing this kind of elaborate dance, as the Eastern philosophers would look at it as, right? And the idea of the master here in Hermeticism is that, and this is beyond me, but I'm just giving it to you how I've studied it. You have your upswing, which is towards the good or towards the compassionate, and you know that you're going to have a backswing towards the hatred or what have you. You know, you have good times, but then you'll have the bad times, right? That when you've had a tremendous opportune time of your life, it's preceded by a kind of darker time. The masters claim that they are aware of when these backswings will happen, and that the human being is always participating on the conscious and the subconscious realms. So it's to say that the master can somehow recognize that they're on the upswing and then move the negative swing into the subconscious so that it doesn't affect the conscious mind. So it can maintain a level of bliss and equal footing no matter what's happening. And this is a level of mastery that, again, you can use your will to not get the better of, but to understand your emotional swings. This is self-reflective. This is being self-realized. This is being, in a cliche of the sense, enlightened, in knowing what's going to come before it comes, in knowing how to handle that in a beautiful way, and in knowing how to go with the dance, you know, how to do the dance instead of rebelling endlessly to the sways of change in life. Join it or be damned. You know, as a last note before I move on, the dance of your life too is a dance between your internal environment and your external environment. What will you create? How will you affect, right? Who will you dance with? This is an amazing allegory. I love it. This is the rhythm, you know. Can you get down with it? Can you jive with it, right? Are you going to ride the roller coaster and enjoy it, or are you going to get nauseous, you know? So this is where, you know, put your mind. So got two more. The principle of cause and effect. Every cause has its effect, and every effect has its cause. Chance is but a name for a law unrecognized. Nothing escapes the law. So we might say that things are up to chance, right? That it was random, that it could have happened anytime, chance, you know, by chance. But this is to say that there are laws happening, there are things at work that we don't understand. And for everything that we don't understand, we'll use the name chance. But this is to say in Hermeticism, I've probably screwed that up a few times in this talk. In Hermeticism, that everything is following the laws that are true on all planes of existence, that are ordained by the all. Let's break this down a little bit. A man robs a store, and the authorities are going to go out, and they're going to look for the cause, the man who did it. And they might find him, right? They found him. And now they found the cause to that effect. But the trick here is that what made that man? And by that I mean, what were the circumstances that had that man act in such a way? And you can start digging into that. And you'll find that there was a series of circumstances involving many other people, even people that this person never knew, that left him in the particular position and the particular mentality that allowed for this specific event to occur. So then you're looking at systemic things. And then in systemic things, you have to start going back into history, which will just go on and on and on, right?
But it's much easier just to blame the man, right? He's the cause. He's the end and all of the situation. Ought not look any further. Now, apply this too in your ancestry. You can have about 4 grandparents by blood. But how many great-grandparents? How many great-great-grandparents? How many great-great-great-grandparents? How many great-great-great-great-great-grandparents do you have? And you notice that the further back in ancestry, in your causal network, the further back you go, the more numerous all the factors. And so you have a man who got busy with a lady back in prehistorical times that somehow, through the butterfly effect, amounted into empires, amounted into consumerism and postmodernism, right? This is the same trope. The butterfly lands perfectly on a rock on a sunny ridge, and this topples an empire, creates a tidal wave, you know? So this is yet again an example where I can say reassert your power, because what you do now has implications far in the future, far, far, far in the future. So now, if you're looking at this in a very small way, your situation right now, it's easy for the modern mentality to think that yet again, we are a victim of all the things that came before us. We had no control over all the things that came before us. But flip that script, right? Now you stand at the beginning of history. You stand at the penultimate point of potentiality. You could do anything with what will be. And this is that kind of Gandhi thing. Be the change you want to see in the world. You might think that your actions are very small. What little things that you can do to be an example of what you want to see in the world. But these things will have a change. Your internal dialogue with the external world, your action will reverberate through time. This is all very common sense. I'm not speaking crazy here. So in this way, it's calling you, the principle of cause and effect is calling you to be proactive, to becoming the means, become the cause of things. Don't relegate yourself to being a pithy little effect, right? Use your will, use your conscientiousness, your awareness to think about what you can do with it. Cause and effect. Now, the last one is the principle of gender. And it's saying gender, not sex. So this isn't about sexual orientation. This isn't about how anything identifies. This is purely about the more archetypal aspects of masculine and feminine. Gender, in this way, masculine, feminine, yin, yang, exist in all things. All things. It receives and it emits. It intakes and it manifests. In this way, you could see how all the languages, not all the languages, but how many languages of the world designate different things as masculine and feminine. Even this is too ham-fisted. It's to say everything includes masculine and feminine. So your eating, your breathing is masculine and feminine. When you breathe, this is a good example. When you breathe in, this is yin, feminine. And when you breathe out, this is masculine. This is yang. So the most mundane things include what is receiving, what is putting out. A battery, an electrode has 2 ends. They say positive and negative, but that's not really a good way of putting this. It would more accurately be called masculine and feminine. When you are trying to place, you're trying to fix your car, it uses bolts. Okay, well, you need the space for the bolts to be driven into in order to call it secure. Look at the light bulbs. Look at how they're shaped. Look at a cup. A cup's only effective because it has the open space. That open space is the feminine. The pouring in of something is the masculine. In this way, on the cosmic level, you have the black holes, which are taking all this stuff in. This is feminine. The Big Bang could be viewed as a tremendously masculine act. The exuding. So if masculinity was all there was, it would all just be acting without restraint, and everything would become chaos. And with feminine energy being alone, everything would just reflect upon itself and would fail to actually do anything. It would be stagnant. It would be a placid pond. So in order to make the dance happen, in order to make anything happen, in order to make that rhythm, we need both. Everything needs both. So in contemporary society, we have way too much yang energy, too much masculine energy. Gotta gotta do things. And life is prodding you on. You gotta go faster, you gotta be productive. You gotta make more money so that you can get your own house, blah, 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 right? Yang, 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 yang. And then what we need is more of this yin energy, which is this, I'm not thinking about a damn thing. And not in the stupid way. It's in the reflective way. So chill, man, chill. Take it easy, Lay in the yard, soak up the sun. Too much of one or the other isn't good. But you got to self-medicinalize with which one you're neglecting, So in this, as a quick summary, being that I've gone over my time, you can see how all these principles bleed into each other, right? The opposites. One principle is one of the opposites, okay? Well, then this other principle is about masculine and feminine, right? And then you have the cause and effect. Well, these are also opposites, but then you can see how this bleeds into the principle of rhythm. Okay, yeah. Also kind of bleeds into the principle of polarity, right? And then all of this, you're trying to think about it, right? You're trying to realize it, and that's corresponding with things, and that it's all mental, right? It's all mental. You're trying to dig this through with your head. How do I perceive it? How's it changing the way that I perceive things outside of me, right? On the cellular level, on the microbial level, on the astral level, on the cosmic level, right? So all of these principles involve what? A type of self-empowerment, a type of realization of what's happening around you. And again, to distinguish it from Gnosticism, it's not about using these things to escape. It's about using these things to realize where you are, to become empowered, to have your own personal agency. Notice too that the philosophy here isn't calling you toward the dark arts, right? The secret magic traditions. It's calling you to become more wholesome, more realized. It's calling you to become more woke, more present in what actually is. So in this way, this is where it begins, right? You see all these different occult traditions fan out from this. You see all this ambiguity as to the nature of Hermes Trismegistus fan out from this, right? But this is where it's at. Vibration, perception, mentalism, right? Opposites, paradoxes, right? This stuff that I've been talking about is the bedrock to all of this fantasticalness, all this kind of sensationalism that's come out of it. So with all that kind of wrapped up, I encourage you sincerely, if you've made it through this whole thing, sincerely to study, work with these principles, do what you can
to be more present, do what you can to be more conscientious, use the power of your will to escape certain ignorances. The more you dive into this stuff and practice it, I think it would only be for the better of anyone who can grapple with this subject. And like we said at the beginning, the lips of wisdom are shut, except to the ears of understanding.